Copyright disclaimer under Section 107 of the Copyright Act 1976. Allowance is made for fair use for purposes such as criticism, comment, news reporting, scholarship, and research. Fair use is a use permitted by copyright statute that might.
Wuthering Heights, a psychological autopsy of obsession. Prologue, the house that breathes. Wind. Not gentle wind, but something violent, something that howls. Across the Yorkshire moors stands a house that does not simply exist, it watches. Yorkshire moors. This is not just a love story. It is not merely tragedy. It is a long-form psychological case study of two damaged souls who mistake trauma for destiny. Tonight, we are not retelling a romance. We are conducting an autopsy. The patient, a relationship. The cause of death, obsession. This is Wuthering Heights. Chapter 1. The Arrival of a Stranger. The story begins not with love, but with intrusion. A child appears on the doorstep of Wuthering Heights, dark-haired, silent, unknown origin. His name will become legend. Heathcliff. To understand Heathcliff, we must understand abandonment trauma. He is brought home by Mr. Earnshaw, raised alongside Catherine Earnshaw, and immediately positioned as both insider and outsider. Psychologically, this creates what modern trauma studies would call identity fragmentation, attachment instability, hypervigilance. He is not family. He is not servant. He is not equal. He is undefined. And undefined children grow into dangerous adults. Chapter 2. Catherine. The Mirror Personality. Catherine Earnshaw is not simply a romantic heroine. She is volatile energy in human form. From childhood, she forms a bond with Heathcliff that bypasses normal emotional development. They do not grow together. They fuse. In psychological theory, this resembles enmeshed attachment, codependent identity formation, emotional mirroring. Catherine famously declares, "I am Heathcliff," not metaphorically, psychologically. Her identity lacks boundaries. Without Heathcliff, she does not know who she is. This is not love. This is identity collapse. Chapter 3. Abuse as Foundation. After Mr. Earnshaw dies, Hindley Earnshaw becomes master of the house, and he transforms Heathcliff from adopted son to degraded servant. Humiliation, physical labor, social isolation, trauma layered upon trauma. This is critical, because unresolved humiliation often mutates into revenge fixation. Heathcliff does not process pain. He stores it, and stored pain becomes weaponized. Chapter 4. The Decision That Destroys Everything. Catherine makes a decision that fractures reality. She chooses to marry Edgar Linton. Edgar Linton, not for love, but for status, for security, for social mobility. Here lies the psychological rupture. Catherine believes she can marry Edgar and spiritually remain fused with Heathcliff. This is cognitive dissonance at catastrophic scale. You cannot divide the self without consequence. When Heathcliff overhears part of her confession and disappears, the abandonment cycle repeats. And this time, it hardens him. Chapter 5. Rebirth of a Monster. Years later, Heathcliff returns. Transformed. Wealthy. Refined. Controlled. But internally, unhealed. His psychological profile now shows narcissistic injury, obsessive rumination, revenge-driven behavior, emotional suppression. He no longer seeks love. He seeks retribution, and revenge is simply grief with direction. Chapter 6. Love or Possession. When Heathcliff sees Catherine again, the chemistry is still volcanic. But something has changed. The innocence is gone. What remains is territorial obsession. He does not want her happiness. He wants ownership of her suffering. This is not romantic longing. This is trauma bonding. Trauma bonds form when two individuals connect through shared pain rather than shared growth. And trauma bonds do not end peacefully. They explode. Chapter 7. Catherine's Decline. Catherine deteriorates psychologically. Her emotional instability intensifies. Mood volatility, self-starvation, delusional thinking, identity dissociation. She feels trapped between two selves. Catherine Earnshaw, wild, untamed, elemental. Catherine Linton, socially elevated, emotionally suffocated. The body often expresses what the mind cannot reconcile. Her illness becomes symbolic. The collapse of divided identity. Chapter 8. Death as Escape. Catherine dies giving birth. But psychologically, her death begins long before. She cannot survive fragmentation. Heathcliff's reaction is not grief. It is rage at the universe. He begs her spirit to haunt him, to never leave him. This is not romantic devotion. It is inability to tolerate separation. He would rather be tormented eternally than abandoned peacefully. Chapter 9. Generational Curse. The most disturbing element of Wuthering Heights is not the love story. It is what happens after. Heathcliff projects his unresolved pain onto the next generation. Hareton Earnshaw. Young Catherine Linton. Linton Heathcliff. Hareton Earnshaw. Catherine Linton. He recreates his own childhood abuse. Because trauma unprocessed becomes trauma repeated. This is psychological inheritance. Pain passed down like property. Chapter 10. The Haunting. In the end, Heathcliff becomes hollow. He stops eating, stops sleeping, stops caring about revenge. Because revenge does not resurrect the dead. His obsession consumes itself. He begins to see Catherine everywhere, not as ghost story, but as psychological projection. When he dies, locals claim they see the two of them wandering the moors. But perhaps the haunting is metaphor. Two souls unable to separate even in death. Analysis: what this story really is. Wuthering Heights is not about ideal love. It is about identity fusion, abandonment trauma, class resentment, revenge pathology, emotional immaturity. It is the anatomy of obsession mistaken for destiny. Modern psychology would diagnose both protagonists with severe attachment disorder traits. But the novel predates psychology, and yet it understands the human mind with frightening precision. Why this story still disturbs us? Because it exposes something uncomfortable. Intensity is not proof of love. Destruction is not proof of passion. Suffering is not proof of depth. Sometimes love is simply two wounded people refusing to heal. Conclusion: the autopsy report. Cause of death: mutual obsession, untreated trauma, identity collapse, time of death: the moment Catherine believed she could divide her soul. Final note: the house still stands, the wind still howls, and somewhere on the moors, two shadows walk, not as lovers, but as a warning. Storm over the Moors, the Gothic Revolution of Wuthering Heights. Opening sequence, England, 1847. England is changing. Factories rise. Empires expand. Cities thicken with smoke. But in the remote wilderness of northern England, far from industrial ambition, a different storm is gathering. On the wind-swept lands of the Yorkshire moors, a novel is born. It will scandalize readers, confuse critics, disturb moral society. Its title, Wuthering Heights. Published in 1847 under the pseudonym Ellis Bell, the book defied everything Victorian England believed fiction should be. This is not merely a love story. It is a rebellion disguised as a novel. Part 1. The Woman Behind the Storm. The author, Emily Brontë, was not a socialite, not a literary celebrity, not a London intellectual. She lived in near isolation in the village of Haworth. Her world consisted of moors, wind, and silence. Unlike many Victorian writers, Emily Brontë did not seek approval. She did not write to comfort. She wrote to expose. Victorian literature often rewarded virtue and punished sin. But Wuthering Heights refuses that moral arithmetic. It presents characters who are neither redeemed nor neatly condemned. In 1847, that was radical. Part 2. The Gothic Blueprint. To understand this novel, we must understand the Gothic tradition. The Gothic genre thrived on isolated settings, emotional extremity, supernatural suggestion, psychological darkness. Yet Wuthering Heights does something unprecedented. Instead of castles in foreign lands, it situates horror inside the English countryside. The terror is domestic. The monster is human. The haunting is emotional. The house itself becomes character. Wuthering Heights, brutal, exposed, wind-lashed, reflects chaos. Thrushcross Grange, refined, controlled, civilized, represents order. These are not just buildings. They are ideological battlegrounds. Part 3. Class War on the Moors. Victorian England was obsessed with hierarchy. Birth determined destiny. Class defined value. Into this rigid system enters Heathcliff, an orphan of unknown origin. His ambiguity threatens the structure. He is neither servant nor gentleman, neither insider nor outsider. His rise to wealth later in the novel destabilizes the social order. He buys property, controls inheritance, manipulates lineage. Through Heathcliff, Brontë critiques class rigidity. She suggests that social structures built on exclusion eventually collapse under resentment. This was dangerous commentary in 1847. Part 4. Love as Anarchy. Romantic fiction of the era often presented love as moral uplift. But here, love destroys. Catherine Earnshaw chooses social advancement over emotional authenticity. Her marriage to Edgar Linton is socially correct, emotionally disastrous. Brontë exposes a cultural truth. When society pressures individuals to prioritize status over self, catastrophe follows. The Victorian ideal of the angel in the house dissolves in Catherine's volatility. She is neither submissive nor domesticated. She is elemental, uncontainable. In this way, the novel quietly challenges gender expectations. Part 5. The Double Narrative Structure. One of the most innovative features of Wuthering Heights is its narrative architecture. The story is told through layers. Mr. Lockwood, the outsider observer. Nellie Dean, the embedded narrator. Nellie Dean. This dual narration creates instability. We never receive pure truth. We receive interpretation, memory, bias. This structure mirrors Gothic uncertainty. Reality is fragmented. Perspective is unreliable. Readers must assemble meaning themselves. In 1847, this complexity was unconventional. Part 6. Supernatural or psychological. One of the most debated elements of the novel is the ghost of Catherine. Lockwood claims to see her apparition at the window. But is it real? Or a projection of guilt and imagination? Brontë never confirms. The supernatural remains ambiguous. This ambiguity elevates the novel beyond simple ghost story. The haunting may symbolize unresolved desire, emotional imprisonment, past trauma refusing burial. The Gothic becomes psychological. Part 7. Violence without apology. Victorian fiction often softened brutality. Wuthering Heights does not. There is domestic abuse, emotional cruelty, forced marriage, child manipulation. Heathcliff becomes tyrant, but the novel does not frame him as cartoon villain. Instead, it presents him as product of social humiliation. Brontë refuses to sanitize suffering, and that refusal shocked early critics. One reviewer called the book coarse and savage. Yet that savagery was deliberate. It exposed the violence hidden beneath polite society. Part 8. Generational consequences. Unlike many Gothic tales, this novel extends beyond one tragic romance. The next generation inherits the emotional wreckage. Young Catherine and Heathcliff Earnshaw form a contrast to their predecessors. Heathcliff Earnshaw. Where the first generation embodies destruction, the second suggests reconciliation. Education replaces ignorance. Patience replaces revenge. Brontë does not offer simplistic redemption, but she allows the possibility of healing. In this, the novel evolves beyond pure tragedy. Part 9. Critical reception and RE evaluation. When first published, Wuthering Heights received mixed reviews. Some critics were appalled by its moral ambiguity. Others were unsettled by its emotional extremity. It did not fit Victorian expectations, but literary history re-evaluated it. By the 20th century, scholars recognized its innovation. Psychological realism, nonlinear narrative, complex anti-hero, structural experimentation. It is now considered one of the greatest English novels ever written. Part 10. Why it endures. Why does this story survive centuries? Because it resists simplicity. It refuses to tell readers what to feel. It challenges the notion that love equals virtue. It presents nature as force beyond civilization. It acknowledges that passion can coexist with cruelty. And most importantly, it refuses moral comfort. Closing sequence. The storm never ends. The wind over the moors still howls. Visitors to Yorkshire still stand before the landscapes that inspired the novel. But the true storm is not meteorological. It is human. Wuthering Heights was not simply a Gothic romance. It was a quiet revolution against literary politeness. It dismantled the idea that fiction must reward goodness and punish darkness. Instead, it revealed that human beings are complicated, contradictory, and often destructive. In 1847, that truth was unsettling. In 2026, it remains so. Because the storm Brontë wrote about was never confined to the moors. It exists wherever passion overpowers restraint, where class divides humanity, where love becomes battlefield. And as long as those forces endure, so will Wuthering Heights. Heathcliff, the anatomy of a Byronic anti-hero. A man without a beginning. Every legend has an origin story. Heathcliff does not. He arrives without history, without lineage, without proof of belonging. Found wandering the streets of Liverpool, brought home like a misplaced object, he enters the world of Wuthering Heights as a question mark. No surname, no inheritance, no identity anchor, and that absence will define everything that follows. This is not the story of a villain. This is the biography of a man shaped by rejection. Phase 1. The Unclaimed Child. Mr. Earnshaw finds the boy in Liverpool and brings him to Wuthering Heights. To the Earnshaw household, he is an intrusion. To Hindley Earnshaw, he is competition. To Catherine Earnshaw, he is discovery. From the beginning, Heathcliff's existence destabilizes hierarchy. He is darker-skinned, foreign-looking, socially undefined. Victorian England feared ambiguity, and Heathcliff embodies it. Psychologically, early childhood stability determines adult attachment. Heathcliff's foundation is uncertainty. He learns quickly. Love is conditional. Safety is temporary. Power belongs to those born into it. Phase 2. Brotherhood turned hostility. When Mr. Earnshaw dies, Hindley inherits authority, and Heathcliff loses protection. Hindley Earnshaw. Hindley degrades him from companion to servant. He is denied education, forced into manual labor, stripped of dignity. This period is critical in shaping his psyche. Repeated humiliation produces two possible outcomes: submission, vengeance. Heathcliff chooses the second. But revenge does not form instantly. It simmers. Phase 3. The Wild Bond. Catherine Earnshaw becomes his emotional equal. Catherine Earnshaw. They roam the moors together, untamed, unfiltered, inseparable. In Catherine, Heathcliff experiences recognition, reflection, validation. She sees him not as servant, but as force. Their relationship bypasses Victorian restraint. It is primal. However, this bond contains a fatal flaw. It is built on shared rebellion, not stability. They do not balance each other. They amplify each other. Phase 4. The Moment of Fracture. Catherine chooses to marry Edgar Linton. Edgar Linton. Her reasoning is practical. Heathcliff hears only betrayal. This moment transforms him. He disappears. No farewell. No explanation. When he leaves, he is a wounded young man. When he returns, he is something else entirely. Phase 5. The Reinvention. Years later, Heathcliff reappears wealthy and refined. The novel never explains how he gains his fortune. This narrative gap is powerful. It suggests transformation through will alone. He has mastered the one system that rejected him: money. With wealth comes leverage. With leverage comes control. He purchases Wuthering Heights, manipulates inheritances, engineers marriages. Revenge becomes strategic. He does not lash out impulsively. He calculates. Phase 6. Marriage without love. He marries Isabella Linton. Isabella Linton. Not for affection, but to wound Edgar. Isabella becomes collateral damage in a war she does not understand. This is a defining feature of Heathcliff's adulthood. People become instruments. He replicates the cruelty once inflicted upon him, not because he enjoys suffering for its own sake, but because pain is the only language he trusts. Phase 7. Tyrant of the Heights. As master of Wuthering Heights, Heathcliff becomes authoritarian. He controls property, education, marriage arrangements, financial futures. He reduces Hareton to illiteracy, mirroring his own childhood degradation. Catherine Earnshaw. This is the psychological pivot. He has become the oppressor. The cycle is complete. The abused child has grown into the architect of suffering. Phase 8. Obsession outlives love. Catherine dies. Yet Heathcliff's fixation intensifies. He speaks to her ghost, begins to withdraw from earthly concerns. His revenge loses meaning. Without Catherine as adversary and mirror, his identity destabilizes. He no longer seeks dominance. He seeks reunion. The hardened strategist dissolves into haunted recluse. Phase 9. The decline. In his final days, Heathcliff stops eating, stops enforcing authority, stops participating in life. He wanders the moors at night, smiling at unseen visions. For a man defined by control, surrender is the ultimate paradox. He no longer fights. He waits. Phase 10. Legacy of a Byronic figure. Heathcliff fits the mold of the Byronic hero. Dark past, emotional intensity, social alienation, moral ambiguity, self-destructive passion. Yet he surpasses it. Unlike romantic anti-heroes who seek redemption, Heathcliff never apologizes. He does not ask forgiveness. He does not regret. He simply burns until nothing remains. Psychological profile summary. If evaluated through modern frameworks, Heathcliff might display traits of complex trauma, obsessive attachment disorder, narcissistic injury response, emotional dysregulation, but clinical language cannot fully capture him. He is larger than diagnosis. He represents the fury of exclusion, the rage of the marginalized, the danger of unprocessed grief. Closing. The man who could not belong. Heathcliff's tragedy is not that he loved too deeply. It is that he never belonged anywhere except inside his obsession. He was never fully Earnshaw, never Linton, never socially accepted. His entire life becomes an argument against a world that refused him entry. And in the end, he achieves the only union he believes possible. Death beside Catherine. On the moors where they once ran as children. Two forces of nature. Uncivilized. Unreconciled. Unforgotten. Catherine Unbound. Women, Power, and Rebellion in Wuthering Heights. Opening. The cage with walls you cannot see. In 19th century England, a woman did not need iron bars to be imprisoned. Marriage could be a cage. Inheritance laws could be a cage. Reputation could be a cage. In 1847, a novel emerged that quietly exposed those cages. Not through speeches, not through manifestos, but through the life and death of a woman who refused to be contained. Her name was Catherine Earnshaw, and her story was not a romance. It was a rebellion. The world that shaped her. To understand Catherine, we must understand Victorian womanhood. Mid-19th century England defined women by three primary roles: daughter, wife, mother. Legal identity dissolved upon marriage. property transferred to husbands. Social value depended on respectability. Passion was dangerous. Independence was unfeminine. Ambition was inappropriate. Into this rigid structure walks a girl who runs across the moors like a storm. Catherine Earnshaw does not behave. She climbs. She shouts. She defies. She belongs more to the Yorkshire moors than to drawing rooms. Her wildness is not merely personality. It is resistance, the civilizing project. When Catherine stays at Thrushcross Grange after being injured, transformation begins. Edgar Linton. There, she is introduced to refinement, silk dresses, formal manners, social polish. Victorian society believed women required refinement to be marriageable. Catherine's return to Wuthering Heights is symbolic. She comes back dressed as a lady. But inside, she remains divided. The novel exposes a core feminist tension. Can a woman be both socially accepted and authentically herself? Catherine attempts to become both. The attempt destroys her. Marriage as strategy. Catherine chooses to marry Edgar Linton, not because she lacks feeling for Heathcliff, but because she understands the economics of survival. Marriage, in Victorian England, was often transactional. Security mattered. Property mattered. Position mattered. Catherine's decision is frequently labeled betrayal. But from a feminist lens, it is strategic. She recognizes her vulnerability in a patriarchal system. Heathcliff, as a socially ambiguous outsider, offers passion, not protection. Edgar offers stability, not soul. Catherine chooses stability, and in doing so, sacrifices her emotional truth, property and power. Under 19th-century English law, women could not easily own property independently after marriage. This reality underpins much of the novel's tension. Heathcliff's later manipulation of inheritance is not random cruelty. It exploits legal structures that disadvantage women. Isabella Linton's fate illustrates this starkly. Isabella Linton. She marries Heathcliff believing in romance. Instead, she loses autonomy. Her property becomes leverage. Her body becomes site of control. She cannot easily escape. The novel does not romanticize her suffering. It exposes it. Voice and silencing. The novel's narrative structure is significant. The story is told largely through Nellie Dean. Nellie Dean. But Nellie is both participant and narrator. Women's stories are filtered, interpreted, judged. Catherine's own voice becomes fragmented. Her famous declaration, "I am Heathcliff," is both empowerment and erasure. She defines herself in relation to a man. Her identity fuses outward instead of inward. This is tragic irony. Even in rebellion, she cannot exist entirely independent of male reference. The madwoman parallel. Victorian literature often punished women who defied norms. They became ill, hysterical, isolated, dead. Catherine's mental deterioration follows this pattern. Her emotional outbursts are labeled instability. Her refusal to conform becomes pathology. The body becomes battlefield. Her illness can be interpreted as psychosomatic protest. She cannot reconcile societal expectations with internal truth, so her body collapses under contradiction. Second-generation possibility. The novel's later chapters introduce young Catherine and Hareton. Catherine Linton. Hareton Earnshaw. Unlike her mother, young Catherine gradually learns patience, education, mutual respect. Her relationship with Hareton evolves differently. It is not explosive. It is constructive. This shift matters. It suggests growth. Perhaps Brontë is not offering despair, but cautious evolution. The second, Catherine negotiates space within patriarchy rather than attempting to burn it down. Emily Bronte's quiet radicalism. Emily Brontë, published under a male pseudonym. Why? Because female authors were often dismissed. The irony is profound. A woman critiques patriarchy while hiding behind male identity to be published. The novel never explicitly argues for women's rights, but it dramatizes their confinement with ruthless clarity. And sometimes fiction can challenge power more effectively than manifestos. 9. Love as containment. From a feminist perspective, the central relationship is not romantic ideal. It is a case study in how women are pulled between emotional authenticity, social obligation. Catherine's tragedy lies not in loving Heathcliff, but in living in a world that forces her to choose between survival and self. Her famous line about degrading herself by marrying Heathcliff reveals internalized class ideology. She believes love is insufficient without status. This belief is socially and kills her. Part haunting as metaphor. Catherine's ghost at the window is often interpreted literally, but metaphorically she represents unfulfilled potential, suppressed identity, the woman who could not exist fully in her era. Her haunting becomes symbolic of every woman whose autonomy was constrained by social expectation. The window separates interior from exterior, domestic from wild, civilization from nature. Catherine remains trapped between those worlds. Conclusion: a woman too large for her world. Catherine Earnshaw was not designed to survive Victorian England. She was too fierce, too divided, too unwilling to shrink. Wuthering Heights does not present a triumphant feminist hero. It presents the cost of confinement. It exposes how systems shape choices, how marriage can silence, how property can imprison, and how identity can fracture under expectation. More than a Gothic romance, the novel becomes a quiet indictment of a society that demanded women become smaller versions of themselves. Catherine refused, and the refusal destroyed her. But through her destruction, the novel endures. Because even today, her question lingers. What happens when a woman refuses to fit the shape assigned to her? On the moors, the wind still answers. Love or obsession? The dangerous illusion at the heart of Wuthering Heights. Opening question: what is love? Before we enter the storm, before we walk the moors, we must ask one question. What is love? Is it freedom or possession? Is it sacrifice or consumption? For centuries, readers have described Wuthering Heights as one of the greatest love stories ever written. But what if it isn't a love story at all? What if it is a philosophical warning about confusing love with obsession? Tonight, we investigate the difference. Part 1. Defining love. Love, in its healthiest form, requires mutual growth, respect for autonomy, emotional security, space for individuality. Love allows two people to exist separately while choosing togetherness. It does not erase identity. It strengthens it. But obsession is different. Obsession demands ownership, exclusivity, emotional dominance, fear of abandonment. Obsession cannot tolerate distance. It confuses intensity with depth. And nowhere is that confusion more vividly dramatized than in the relationship between Heathcliff and Catherine. Part 2. The declaration that changed everything. Catherine Earnshaw declares, "I am Heathcliff." Catherine Earnshaw. It sounds romantic. It sounds poetic. But philosophically, it is alarming. To say, "I am another person," is to dissolve boundaries. Love requires connection. But identity fusion eliminates selfhood. Catherine does not say, "I love Heathcliff." She says she is him. This is the beginning of collapse. Because when identity merges completely, separation becomes death. Part 3. Heathcliff's return. Years after Catherine marries Edgar Linton, Heathcliff returns transformed. Heathcliff. He is wealthy, controlled, strategic, but his emotional core has not evolved. He does not seek reconciliation. He seeks vindication. If love wishes for the beloved's happiness, even apart, obsession wishes for the beloved's suffering, if separation occurs. Heathcliff cannot tolerate Catherine choosing another life, not because he loves her flourishing, but because he cannot endure her autonomy. Part 4. Love that destroys. Catherine's marriage to Edgar Linton introduces a philosophical tension. Edgar Linton. Edgar offers stability, calm affection, domestic peace. It may not be fiery, but it is safe. And yet Catherine withers. Why? Because safety without authenticity becomes suffocation. Here the novel complicates the debate. Heathcliff represents destructive intensity. Edgar represents secure moderation. Catherine desires both. But human beings cannot split themselves between emotional extremes without consequence. The novel asks, is passionate destruction preferable to peaceful emptiness? Or is that a false dichotomy? Part 5. Obsession as immortality. After Catherine's death, Heathcliff begs her spirit to haunt him. He would rather suffer eternally than lose connection. This reveals obsession's ultimate desire. Permanence. Obsession refuses mortality. It rejects the idea that love can end. Healthy love grieves and releases. Obsession clings beyond death. In this way, Heathcliff's longing is not romantic transcendence. It is refusal to accept reality. Part 6. The moors as metaphor. The setting of the novel is not accidental. The Yorkshire moors are vast, untamed, indifferent to human drama. Nature in the novel mirrors emotional extremity. Storms erupt without warning. Wind howls without apology. The landscape does not nurture. It exposes. Heathcliff and Catherine belong to this terrain. Their bond is elemental, not ethical. But civilization demands boundaries, and obsession rejects them. Part 7. The second generation. The younger Catherine and Hareton present a contrast. Catherine Linton, Hareton Earnshaw. Their relationship grows gradually, through patience, through shared learning, through forgiveness. This is not explosive passion. It is cultivated affection. The novel quietly suggests that sustainable love is built, not ignited. The younger pair do not dissolve into each other. They develop side by side. Part 8. Philosophical verdict. So what does the novel ultimately argue? It does not condemn intensity outright, nor does it glorify emotional restraint alone. Instead, it dramatizes imbalance. Heathcliff and Catherine represent love stripped of proportion. They cannot coexist peacefully. They cannot exist apart. Their connection transcends social boundaries, but it destroys everything in its path. The philosophical lesson is not that passion is evil. It is that passion without maturity becomes devastation. Part 9. Why we mistake obsession for love. Why do readers continue calling this the greatest romance? Because intensity is seductive. Drama feels meaningful. Suffering feels profound. We often equate pain with depth, but the novel challenges that instinct. It shows that obsession may look like devotion, but it consumes rather than nourishes. Heathcliff's lifelong fixation does not produce growth. It produces emptiness. Part 10. Final reflection. In the end, both Heathcliff and Catherine die young. Their love does not mature. It calcifies. The survivors, the younger generation, choose a different path. Education over revenge. Dialogue over dominance. Growth over fixation. Perhaps that is the quiet hope embedded in the narrative. Love can be intense, but it must also allow space. Otherwise, it ceases to be love at all. Closing. The illusion. When the wind moves across the moors, it sounds eternal. But even wind changes direction. Heathcliff and Catherine believed their bond defied time. Perhaps it did. But eternity without peace is not romantic. It is restless. And that is the difference between love and obsession. One frees. The other binds. One nurtures. The other devours. Wuthering Heights does not give us a perfect romance. It gives us a mirror, and asks us to decide which kind of love we are chasing. The inheritance of pain. How Wuthering Heights becomes a generational curse. There are some houses that pass down wealth, some that pass down land, some that pass down legacy, and then there are houses that pass down pain. On the wild edge of the Yorkshire moors stands Wuthering Heights, not merely as a building, but as a vessel of memory, a vessel of resentment, a vessel of unfinished suffering. This is not simply the story of Heathcliff and Catherine. It is the story of how trauma, when left unresolved, does not die. It reproduces. It evolves. It inherits. When Mr. Earnshaw brings home a nameless orphan, something subtle begins. Heathcliff. He arrives without family, without certainty, without social anchor. He is loved briefly, then degraded systematically. Hindley Earnshaw, once a child threatened by competition, grows into a man determined to humiliate. Hindley Earnshaw. He strips Heathcliff of education, reduces him to servitude, normalizes cruelty within the walls of the house. And here is where the curse takes root. Because children learn by modeling. Heathcliff absorbs not kindness, but hierarchy. Not empathy, but dominance. When Catherine Earnshaw declares her spiritual unity with Heathcliff, it appears transcendent. Catherine Earnshaw. But even their bond cannot shield them from structure. Class divisions intrude. Marriage becomes transaction. Catherine chooses Edgar Linton, security over volatility. Edgar Linton. Heathcliff disappears. And in that absence, humiliation ferments into design. When he returns, he does not simply seek revenge against individuals. He restructures the entire social order of both houses. He manipulates inheritance law. He exploits addiction. He engineers dependency. He purchases Wuthering Heights. He destabilizes Thrushcross Grange. But the most devastating act is not financial. It is psychological replication. Hareton Earnshaw, son of Hindley, becomes Heathcliff's experiment. Hareton Earnshaw. Denied education. Mocked for ignorance. Raised in emotional deprivation. Hareton grows up in the exact conditions Heathcliff once endured. The oppressed becomes the oppressor. This is how generational trauma functions. It does not invent new wounds. It reenacts old ones. Isabella Linton becomes another casualty. Isabella Linton. She enters marriage naively, believing romance overrides warning. Instead, she experiences isolation and control. Her son, Linton Heathcliff, inherits fragility rather than strength. Linton Heathcliff. He grows sickly, anxious, manipulated. A child shaped not by affection, but by strategic cruelty. Heathcliff does not strike randomly. He calculates lineage. He ensures property transfers through forced marriages. He traps young Catherine into union with Linton. Catherine Linton. In doing so, he merges bloodlines, not for love, but for dominance. But something unexpected begins to shift. The second Catherine and Hareton, initially hostile, gradually soften. Education becomes subversive. When Catherine teaches Hareton to read, it is more than literacy. It is interruption. Knowledge breaks repetition. Affection grows slowly, not explosively. This relationship does not ignite like the first generation. It develops. And that development is revolutionary. Because cycles survive on imitation. The younger pair refuse imitation. They choose learning over pride, dialogue over vengeance, connection over possession. Meanwhile, Heathcliff begins to unravel. Revenge, once his sustaining force, loses structure. He wanders the moors at night, haunted not by ghosts alone, but by exhaustion. The machinery of hatred requires energy, and he is running out. He stops eating, stops enforcing power, stops perpetuating control. The house that once echoed with dominance grows quiet. When Heathcliff dies, the curse does not dramatically explode. It dissipates, not because justice triumphs in spectacle, but because repetition finally breaks. The marriage of young Catherine and Hareton symbolizes restoration, not perfection, not innocence, but repair. Wuthering Heights, once a fortress of resentment, begins to feel almost inhabitable. And this is the novel's deepest insight. Pain inherited is powerful, but it is not invincible. Trauma travels through silence, through modeled behavior, through normalized cruelty, but it can be interrupted through education, through empathy, through choice. The first generation burns. The second generation rebuilds. The moors remain unchanged, vast, indifferent, eternal. But within the house, something shifts. The wind still howls. Yet it no longer carries the same fury. Because the greatest haunting in this story was never supernatural. It was repetition. And when repetition ends, haunting loses its hold. Wuthering Heights is not merely a Gothic romance. It is a study in inheritance, not of wealth, not of title, but of pain, and the rare courage required to end it. Class, control, and conquest, the social war inside Wuthering Heights. In most discussions, Wuthering Heights is reduced to a love story. But love is only the surface. Beneath the romance lies something more volatile. A class war. A struggle for property. A conflict over legitimacy, inheritance, and power. The novel unfolds not just on the windswept Yorkshire moors, but inside the rigid social architecture of 19th-century England, a world obsessed with hierarchy. To understand this story, we must stop asking who loved whom. Instead, we must ask, who owned what? Who controlled whom? Who had the right to belong? Because in this novel, social class is not background scenery. It is the battlefield. When Mr. Earnshaw brings home a dark, nameless orphan from Liverpool, he introduces a destabilizing element into an already structured household. Heathcliff. Heathcliff does not arrive with credentials. He has no surname, no family history, no documented inheritance. Victorian society functioned on lineage. Bloodlines mattered. Property passed through legitimacy. Heathcliff represents the threat of ambiguity. He is racially ambiguous, economically ambiguous, socially undefined. And ambiguity is dangerous in a system built on rigid classification. Hindley Earnshaw senses this danger immediately. Hindley Earnshaw. As biological son, Hindley's power rests on birthright. Heathcliff's presence challenges that structure, not because he demands status, but because he receives affection. In a hierarchical society, affection can destabilize authority. After Mr. Earnshaw dies, Hindley reasserts dominance by demoting Heathcliff to servant status. This act is not merely personal cruelty. It is systemic correction. The social order must be restored. The orphan must return to his place. This moment defines the novel's political undercurrent. Class is not neutral. It is enforced. Catherine Earnshaw complicates this hierarchy. Catherine Earnshaw. She experiences Heathcliff as equal, emotionally and spiritually. But she understands society will never see him that way. Her famous declaration that marrying Heathcliff would degrade her is not purely vanity. It is economic realism. Marriage in Victorian England was social mobility. To marry below one's station meant forfeiting privilege. When she chooses Edgar Linton, she chooses structural security. Edgar Linton. The Lintons represent cultivated gentility. Thrushcross Grange symbolizes refinement, education, wealth continuity. Catherine's choice reflects the pressure of a class system that punishes emotional authenticity if it threatens stability. Love becomes secondary to preservation of status. Heathcliff overhears her reasoning, and something crystallizes. His revenge is not merely romantic jealousy. It is class retaliation. When Heathcliff disappears and later returns wealthy, the transformation is not explained. This narrative silence is powerful. It suggests economic ascent without social acceptance. He has acquired money. But money does not erase stigma. The upper class may tolerate wealth, but it rarely forgets origins. Heathcliff understands this. So instead of seeking acceptance, he seeks control. He manipulates Hindley's gambling addiction to seize Wuthering Heights. He exploits legal mechanisms to secure Thrushcross Grange. He arranges marriages strategically to consolidate property. His revenge is financial architecture. He does not storm the gates. He purchases them. This is class warfare executed through inheritance law. The novel exposes a brutal truth. In a capitalist, inheritance-driven society, ownership equals power. Heathcliff's genius lies in weaponizing legality. He does not break the system. He masters it. Isabella Linton becomes pawn in this strategy. Isabella Linton. Her infatuation blinds her to political reality. Marriage to Heathcliff transfers economic leverage. Once secured, she becomes disposable. Through her, Heathcliff gains proximity to Thrushcross Grange. Through her son, he gains inheritance access. Linton Heathcliff. The cruelty is deliberate, but it is also systemic. The same laws that once excluded Heathcliff now empower him. He is not dismantling hierarchy. He is reversing it. The degradation of Hareton Earnshaw is perhaps the clearest illustration of class manipulation. Hareton Earnshaw. Heathcliff denies him education, mocks his ignorance, reduces him to labor. Why? Because literacy equals mobility. Ignorance ensures subordination. By keeping Hareton uneducated, Heathcliff freezes him in a lower class position. This is social engineering. Heathcliff replicates what was done to him, but now as architect rather than victim. The oppressed becomes oppressor not by abandoning the system, but by mastering it. Meanwhile, young Catherine Linton becomes another instrument. Catherine Linton. Through forced marriage to Linton Heathcliff, property lines merge. Heathcliff consolidates economic territory. The romance is irrelevant. What matters is title transfer. The novel exposes how marriage functions as contract more than companionship. Women become conduits for property flow. their consent secondary to financial outcome. This is not accidental cruelty. It is structural critique. But here lies the paradox. Heathcliff achieves total economic dominance. He owns both estates, controls both bloodlines, and yet he is not satisfied. Why? Because class power without belonging remains hollow. He possesses land, but not legitimacy. He commands fear, but not respect. He wins the war materially, but loses existentially. The novel suggests that upward mobility cannot erase early humiliation. Property cannot repair exclusion. Dominance cannot create acceptance. Heathcliff conquers the system, but the system's values still define him. He measures victory in ownership, because ownership once denied him dignity. And so the cycle continues. Yet the second generation disrupts this political machine. Young Catherine teaches Hareton to read. Education returns. Literacy becomes liberation. Their bond forms not through dominance, but cooperation. This shift matters socially, because it reintroduces equality. Not equality imposed through revenge, but equality built through growth. Their relationship suggests class rigidity can soften when pride dissolves, when learning replaces humiliation, when partnership replaces hierarchy. The estates, once battlegrounds, begin to transform into homes. And that transformation is revolutionary. Wuthering Heights, at its core, is not about romantic tragedy. It is about a society that creates outsiders and then fears their return. It examines how rigid class systems manufacture resentment, how humiliation breeds retaliation, how inheritance law becomes weapon. Heathcliff is not a random villain. He is the inevitable product of exclusion. A system that denies dignity should not be surprised when denied individuals seek dominance. The novel does not excuse his cruelty, but it contextualizes it. And in doing so, it exposes Victorian England's obsession with rank as both stabilizing and corrosive. The two houses, architecture, atmosphere, and the war of spaces in Wuthering Heights. Before we talk about love, before we talk about revenge, before we talk about ghosts, we must talk about architecture, because in Wuthering Heights, the buildings are not background. They are living systems. They breathe. They absorb emotion. They enforce behavior. They shape destiny. On one side stands Wuthering Heights. On the other, Thrushcross Grange. Two houses, two philosophies, two competing visions of existence. Between them stretch the wild expanses of the Yorkshire moors. And those moors are not empty land. They are neutral ground. Uncivilized, unclaimed, untamed. But the houses are ideological machines. Wuthering Heights is introduced as exposed to relentless wind. Its name itself implies turbulence. Wuthering describes violent atmospheric motion. The house is built low, thick-walled, defensive. Stone dominates its structure. Carvings above the door reveal ancestry and date. The architecture is blunt, unornamented, practical. It does not invite. It endures. Inside, the main room functions as kitchen, living space, gathering hall. There is no clear separation between refinement and labor. This lack of division reflects its inhabitants. Raw emotion, minimal restraint, power expressed openly. Here lives Heathcliff. Here once roamed Catherine Earnshaw. Their personalities mirror the structure. Direct, unfiltered, unpolished. The house does not soften conflict. It amplifies it. Doors slam. Windows rattle. Storms penetrate. There is no insulation from intensity. Thrushcross Grange, by contrast, is introduced through light. Soft interiors, carpets, decorative order. It is removed from the wind's assault. Sheltered by trees. Visually refined. Socially elevated. Its rooms are divided carefully. Drawing room, dining room, private chambers. Structure enforces etiquette. Separation enforces civility. Here resides Edgar Linton. His temperament reflects his environment. Measured, polished, restrained. The Grange represents cultivated society. Wuthering Heights represents elemental survival. And Catherine stands between them. When Catherine spends time at Thrushcross Grange recovering from injury, something architectural happens. Her body remains hers. But her environment shifts. Space influences identity. In the Grange, she adopts refinement. Dress changes. Speech softens. Manners adjust. Environment reshapes behavior. Returning to Wuthering Heights, she carries both spaces within her. And the conflict intensifies, because human beings are shaped by the spaces they inhabit. The novel subtly argues that architecture is psychological conditioning. Wuthering Heights produces endurance and aggression. Thrushcross Grange produces decorum and fragility. Heathcliff's eventual control over both houses transforms the spatial dynamic. When he acquires Wuthering Heights legally, the physical structure remains unchanged. But its atmosphere hardens further. Laughter disappears. Warmth drains. The kitchen hall becomes domain of intimidation. Furniture does not move. But energy does. When he later secures Thrushcross Grange, the takeover is quieter. Less visible. But symbolically immense. The wild has entered the cultivated. The storm has breached the shelter. Yet something fascinating occurs. Heathcliff does not redesign either house. He does not modernize. He does not renovate. He occupies, which reveals something essential. He wants control, not transformation. The architecture remains, but the emotional climate shifts under his authority. The houses also structure class identity. Wuthering Heights lacks decorative excess. It suggests inherited endurance rather than evolving wealth. Thrushcross Grange reflects surplus. It signals generational prosperity. Ownership of space equals social legitimacy. Heathcliff's conquest of property is spatial revenge. Once excluded from belonging, he now dictates occupancy. But he never feels at home. He commands both houses, yet remains psychologically outside both, which suggests that architecture cannot provide belonging. It can only symbolize it. Consider windows in the novel. Windows are thresholds, barriers between interior and exterior. Catherine's ghost famously appears at a window, knocking, scratching, asking to be let in. The window represents division. Inside is structure. Outside is freedom. Catherine, even in death, exists between. Neither domesticated fully nor wild entirely. Architecture traps her memory. The younger generation alters spatial energy. Catherine Linton, Hareton Earnshaw. When young Catherine begins educating Hareton, they often sit together in shared rooms. The space that once hosted humiliation becomes site of learning. No renovation occurs, yet atmosphere shifts. This suggests environment influences identity, but identity can also reclaim environment. The house does not imprison permanently. Its emotional meaning can evolve. The moors remain the third space. Neither house, neither class, neither structured. They represent possibility beyond architecture. Heathcliff and Catherine as children ran there freely, before social expectation, before marriage contracts, before property disputes. The moors symbolize existence without walls, yet adulthood drives them back into structures, into ownership, into inheritance. The tragedy may not be love alone, but enclosure. As children, they belong to open land. As adults, they are confined by walls. By the end of the novel, Wuthering Heights softens. The tyranny fades with Heathcliff's death. Thrushcross Grange prepares for new occupancy. The physical buildings remain standing, but their emotional temperature cools. The houses survive the storm, which implies something profound. Structures endure longer than passion. Architecture outlasts obsession, and yet it absorbs traces of those who lived within. Wuthering Heights becomes less battlefield, more dwelling. Thrushcross Grange becomes less symbol of superiority, more shared home. Space transforms slowly, but it transforms. Wuthering Heights is not simply a novel about people. It is a novel about environments shaping behavior, about how walls influence emotion, about how rooms hold memory. The two houses are not passive backdrops. They are engines, engines of hierarchy, engines of conflict, engines of transformation, one built to withstand wind, one built to reflect light. Between them stands the moor, unclaimed, unstructured, eternal. And perhaps the novel's final whisper is this: humans build walls to define identity, but identity cannot be fully contained. Storms still shake foundations, ghosts still knock at windows, and houses remember everything. The shadows they leave, intergenerational trauma in Wuthering Heights. Wuthering Heights is a house of walls, storms, and echoes. But the real architecture of this story is not stone or timber. It is the mind. It is the heart. It is the invisible inheritance of suffering passed down, like a family heirloom no one wants to claim. The story begins not with love, but with exclusion. Heathcliff arrives at Wuthering Heights as an orphan, a child without lineage, without name, without protection. Yet he carries an emotional intensity that immediately threatens the balance of the household. Hindley Earnshaw, the biological son, embodies entitlement and fear of displacement. Hindley Earnshaw grows up learning to protect his social standing, absorbing parental neglect and inheritance anxieties. The way Hindley treats Heathcliff is not just cruelty, it is an early psychological shaping, a lesson in dominance, submission, and the mechanics of resentment. And then there is Catherine Earnshaw. Catherine Earnshaw. She experiences the world differently. Catherine's love for Heathcliff is intuitive, emotional, and elemental, but society constrains it. Her choice to marry Edgar Linton is a survival strategy, a compromise between desire and security. Catherine's decision triggers the central trauma, not just for Heathcliff, but for the generations that follow. When Heathcliff disappears and returns, transformed by wealth and cunning, he is no longer a boy subjected to cruelty. He is an architect of revenge, a manipulator of systems and people alike. His methods are both psychological and financial. Every act of dominance, every manipulation of property and marriage, reflects a mind shaped by injustice, seeking closure in control. Consider Hareton Earnshaw. Hareton Earnshaw. Hareton is the physical and emotional echo of Hindley's earlier sins. He is denied education. He is belittled. He is forced into a cycle of ignorance and dependence. Hareton's suffering is not random. It is calculated, a reflection of Heathcliff's own formative trauma. The psychological equation is clear. Trauma begets trauma, repeating across generations. Isabella Linton and her son, Linton Heathcliff, are further evidence of inherited suffering. Isabella Linton enters a marriage under illusion, manipulated by Heathcliff's designs. Linton Heathcliff grows up fragile, sickly, and emotionally controlled. The next generation is caught in the orbit of unresolved conflict, proving that violence and neglect echo longer than memory alone. Yet amidst the cycles of cruelty, a glimmer of change emerges. Catherine Linton and Hareton begin to rewrite the inherited narrative. Through education, patience, and emotional care, they demonstrate that cycles of trauma are not absolute. The younger generation learns to transform pain into understanding. They are not perfect, but they are conscious. This awareness is revolutionary in a household governed by repetition, resentment, and pride. The moors themselves act as a silent witness. Yorkshire moors are indifferent to human suffering. They endure through generations, untouched by ownership, pride, or vengeance. Yet the characters are tethered to them emotionally, running across them as children, mourning upon them as adults, haunted by their own shadows. The natural world is constant, yet humans remain enslaved to memory. In this sense, Wuthering Heights is less a story about romance and more a study in emotional inheritance. It asks fundamental questions. How much of who we are is inherited pain? Can cycles of cruelty ever be consciously broken? What role does social structure play in perpetuating or mitigating suffering? Heathcliff's obsession, Catherine's conflict, and the younger generation's emerging empathy illustrate that humans are simultaneously shaped by and shape their environment. The house, the land, the bloodlines, all become instruments in the orchestration of emotion. Finally, the story offers a paradoxical resolution. Revenge, pain, and neglect can dominate a lifetime. But empathy, education, and patience have the capacity to rewrite inherited scripts. Catherine and Hareton's slow bond suggests that even in a legacy of suffering, choice matters. Wuthering Heights remains haunted, but the haunting is no longer total. The cycle can be disrupted. In the end, Wuthering Heights is not merely Gothic romance. It is a psychological case study, a meditation on trauma, and an exploration of human resilience. The shadows of the past are long, but they are not unchangeable. And this, ultimately, is the true legacy of the moors and the house. They endure, they remember, and they teach that the human heart, no matter how wounded, has the potential to learn, forgive, and love again.
The economics of obsession, power, property, and control in Wuthering Heights. This was never just a love story. Most people believe Wuthering Heights is about passion, about doomed romance, about obsession, about wild love on the moors. But what if that interpretation is incomplete? What if beneath the storms, the longing, and the famous declarations of eternal love lies something colder, something strategic, something calculated? What if this is not a romance, but an economic war? In this documentary deep dive, we examine Wuthering Heights, 2026, not as a Gothic love story, but as a ruthless study of property, inheritance, and social mobility in 19th century England. Because in this world, land is power, marriage is currency, and revenge is financial. Part 1. The arrival of a boy with nothing. When Heathcliff arrives at Wuthering Heights as a child, he possesses nothing. No surname, no estate, no social legitimacy, no inheritance line. In 19th century England, that is not merely poverty. It is powerlessness. He is introduced into a household governed by property law and patriarchal succession. The Earnshaw estate will pass to Hindley. That is assumed. That is tradition. Heathcliff's presence disrupts that structure. Not emotionally, economically. Because if Mr. Earnshaw shows favoritism toward Heathcliff, the hierarchy destabilizes. And hierarchy is everything. Part 2. Property as identity. In Wuthering Heights, houses are not backdrops. They are identity markers. Wuthering Heights is rugged, storm-exposed, structurally old. Thrushcross Grange is refined, symmetrical, aristocratic. To own one is to become something specific. Heathcliff's childhood humiliation is not simply about abuse. It is about status denial. He is reminded constantly that he does not belong to ownership. He is reminded that he will inherit nothing. He is reminded that without land, he is disposable. And this shapes him. Because the powerless do not merely suffer. They observe. Heathcliff studies how power works. He studies how Hindley controls through inheritance. He studies how Edgar Linton commands respect through estate prestige. He learns that affection fades, but deeds endure. Part 3. Catherine's decision. Love versus security. Catherine Earnshaw famously declares that she is Heathcliff. But she does not marry him. Why? Because Catherine understands something Heathcliff initially does not. Emotion cannot protect you from poverty. When she chooses Edgar Linton, she is not rejecting passion. She is selecting economic insulation. Edgar offers stable inheritance, social rank, financial security, predictable structure. Catherine's decision is pragmatic, and in doing so, she triggers Heathcliff's transformation, not into a broken lover, but into a strategist. Part 4. The disappearance. Capital accumulation. Heathcliff vanishes. When he returns, he has wealth. The film deliberately leaves ambiguity around how he acquired it. But what matters is not the method. It is the result. He now understands that, in this society, money is leverage. With capital, he no longer needs approval. He can purchase influence. He can buy debt. He can control outcomes. And this is where the true war begins. Part 5. Debt as a weapon. Hindley Earnshaw falls into alcoholism and financial instability. Heathcliff does not confront him physically. He lends him money. With interest. Quietly. Patiently. Legally. Hindley mortgages the estate. He gambles. He borrows more. And slowly, without raising his voice, Heathcliff gains claim over Wuthering Heights. This is not rage. This is acquisition. By the time Hindley realizes what is happening, the estate is no longer truly his. Revenge has become paperwork. Part 6. Marriage as a financial transaction. Heathcliff then targets Isabella Linton. Isabella Linton believes she is entering romance. But Heathcliff is entering strategy. Marriage grants him proximity to Thrushcross Grange's inheritance line. It is not affection. It is positioning. In 19th century English law, marriage transfers property rights. Heathcliff understands this, and he uses it. Emotion is irrelevant. Marriage is a merger. Part 7. The second generation as assets. The children in this story are not merely narrative continuations. They are economic leverage. Hareton Earnshaw represents lost education and withheld opportunity. Heathcliff deliberately denies him literacy. Why? Because education produces autonomy. And autonomy threatens control. Catherine Linton becomes another strategic connection. Her marriage determines estate consolidation. Heathcliff orchestrates unions not out of romance, but to secure both estates under his influence. And for a time, he succeeds. Part 8. Ownership versus fulfillment. By the final act, Heathcliff owns Wuthering Heights, control over Thrushcross Grange, legal dominance. He has won economically, but something is absent. Peace. Because property acquisition cannot resurrect Catherine, and ownership cannot silence memory. He has mastered the external world, but lost the internal one. Part 9. Capitalism and Emotional Corruption. This adaptation subtly critiques the era's economic structure. In this society, women marry for survival. Men inherit by bloodline. Orphans remain disposable. Debt destroys families. Heathcliff's revenge works because the system allows it. Nothing he does is illegal. Nothing he does breaks the law. He exploits its design. And that is the most chilling realization. The tragedy is not that Heathcliff is monstrous. It is that the system rewards his strategy. Part 10. The Collapse of the Economic Empire. In the final movement of the film, something shifts. The younger generation chooses cooperation over control. Hareton seeks education. Catherine Linton seeks mutual growth. Their relationship is not transactional. It is collaborative. And slowly, Heathcliff's obsession loses relevance. Because ownership without emotional legacy fades. When Heathcliff dies, he leaves behind estates. But no admiration. He conquered land. But not love. Conclusion: the cost of possession. Wuthering Heights, 2026, reveals something powerful. Love may ignite the story, but property drives it. Heathcliff's transformation is not from lover to villain. It is from powerless orphan to economic architect. His tragedy is not that he loses Catherine. It is that he believes control can replace her. And in the end, ownership proves hollow. Because the only thing he ever truly wanted was never something that could be purchased. Catherine Earnshaw, The Anatomy of a Divided Soul. The story belongs to her. For decades, readers and viewers have treated Wuthering Heights as Heathcliff's tragedy. His revenge. His obsession. His darkness. But what if the true catastrophe was Catherine's? What if the storm never began with vengeance, but with division? This is not a story about a woman choosing between two men. It is a story about a woman being forced to choose between two versions of herself. And that choice destroys her. In this deep psychological exploration of Wuthering Heights, 2026, we dismantle the myth of Catherine as selfish, hysterical, or manipulative. Instead, we examine her as something far more tragic. A consciousness torn apart by class expectation, gender confinement, and emotional absolutism. The wild child of the moors. Before society touches her, Catherine Earnshaw is elemental. Catherine Earnshaw is not delicate. She is not refined. She is not cautious. She runs across the moors without restraint. She laughs loudly. She challenges authority. The moors, specifically the windswept landscapes of the Yorkshire moors, are not background. They are her psyche. With Heathcliff, she is honest. Not polite. Not proper. Honest. And that honesty is dangerous in 19th century England. Because girls are not raised to remain wild. They are raised to be desirable. The injury that changed everything. When Catherine is injured and taken to Thrushcross Grange, something subtle but devastating begins. Edgar Linton and his household represent more than wealth. They represent refinement. Silk instead of mud. Etiquette instead of impulsiveness. Controlled speech instead of emotional intensity. Catherine is not imprisoned. She is reshaped. This is crucial. No one forces her transformation violently. It is gentler than that. It is seductive. She sees how respect follows polish. She sees how comfort follows conformity. She sees how security follows presentation. And slowly, she internalizes a new identity. Not because she betrays herself, but because survival demands adaptation. I am Heathcliff. The Confession of Fusion. One of the most misunderstood lines in literary history is Catherine's declaration. I am Heathcliff. This is not romantic exaggeration. It is psychological truth. Heathcliff represents her unrestrained self. He is anger without apology, desire without calculation, intensity without moderation. When she says she is him, she is recognizing that they share the same internal fire. But here is the problem. Society cannot tolerate that fire in her. It tolerates it in him as brute masculinity. In her, it must be suppressed. So she splits. Public Catherine, composed, strategic, socially appropriate. Private Catherine, wild, passionate, defiant. The fracture begins here. The choice that was never a choice. When Catherine decides to marry Edgar, critics often label her shallow. But that reading ignores context. She lives in a world where a woman without marriage faces instability. Inheritance laws favor men. Financial independence is nearly impossible. Her marriage is not betrayal. It is risk management. Edgar offers security, respectability, protection from economic uncertainty. Heathcliff offers intensity, emotional unity, social ruin. Catherine understands the stakes, and she chooses survival. But survival costs authenticity, and authenticity was her oxygen. Part 5. The Return of Heathcliff. The Collision. When Heathcliff returns wealthy and composed, Catherine's internal fracture explodes. She now faces the impossible. Her emotional self and her social self in the same room. Edgar represents her constructed identity. Heathcliff represents her core identity. She cannot merge them, and she cannot abandon either. The film portrays this brilliantly in quiet scenes of eye contact, unfinished sentences, and strained silences. Her body language changes around Heathcliff. She breathes differently. She moves differently. This is not infidelity. It is recognition. But recognition without resolution leads to implosion. Mental collapse as identity collapse. Catherine's decline is often framed as romantic madness. But in this adaptation, it reads differently. It is psychological fragmentation. She cannot reconcile who she is inside with who she must perform outside. Her outbursts are not hysteria. They are pressure leaks. She starves herself not purely out of despair, but as an unconscious rejection of the body that society reshaped. Her illness becomes metaphor. The more she tries to suppress her authentic self, the more her physical body deteriorates. This is not melodrama. This is somatization. The body carrying what the mind cannot resolve. Love as self-recognition. Catherine does not love Heathcliff because he is romantic. She loves him because he mirrors her. He reflects her intensity without dilution. Edgar loves her gently, but he loves a version of her. A refined version. A curated version. Heathcliff loves the raw version, and she cannot exist fully in both worlds. This is the tragedy. Not adultery, not revenge, but incompatibility between authenticity and expectation. Part 8. The Death That Was Preventable. Catherine's death is often romanticized as fate, but this film frames it as inevitability born from repression. If she had been allowed to remain wild, would she have survived? If she had married Heathcliff and faced poverty, would she have endured differently? We cannot know, but we can see that her environment suffocates her. Her room becomes smaller. Her world becomes quieter. Her vitality fades. Not because she stopped loving, but because she stopped integrating. Division became terminal. Part 9. Her Legacy. Even after death, Catherine shapes everything. Heathcliff's obsession persists. Edgar's grief lingers. The younger generation inherits emotional residue. Catherine Linton grows up in the shadow of a mother she never fully knew. The original Catherine becomes myth. But myths distort, and distortion fuels further conflict. Her inability to reconcile her dual identities sets off decades of consequence. Not because she was malicious, but because she was constrained. Reframing her story. Catherine is not the villain of this story. She is its pressure point. She represents every individual forced to choose safety over passion, choose performance over authenticity, choose structure over instinct. Her tragedy lies in being ahead of her time. In a modern context, Catherine might have had choices. In her era, she had calculations. And calculations rarely nourish the soul. The Woman in the Storm. When audiences walk away from Wuthering Heights, 2026, many will still debate Heathcliff. But if we look closely, the storm began with Catherine. Not because she chose incorrectly, but because she was never allowed to choose freely. She was divided, and division destroyed her. Catherine Earnshaw is not a symbol of romance. She is a symbol of fragmentation. And her story is not about loving two men. It is about losing herself between them.
Imagine this, a courtroom, dimly lit, heavy silence. At the center stands a man accused of emotional cruelty, a manipulation, a psychological abuse, a financial explosion, a intergenerational trauma. His name Heathcliff. For generation, audience have debated him, villain, anti-hero, romantic icon, absurd, victim. But what if examine him not through passion, but through accountability? In this and we ask a simple question. Heathcliff arrives the Wuthering Heights as an orphan. He is marginalized immediately. Hindley Earnshaw humiliates him. He is denied education. He is physically and verbally deserted. These facts matter. Childhood trauma reshapes neural development. It distorts attachment patterns. It products, but trauma explains behavior. It does not justify harm. When Heathcliff becomes powerful, he does not simply distance himself from abuse. He replicates it. The abused becomes the enforcer. The victim becomes the architect of suffering, and that transition must be examined carefully. When Heathcliff returns wealthy, he does not return confused, he returns calculated. He studies weakness, he exploits vulnerabilities. He does not love her, he does not respect her, he uses her. Marriage becomes a strategy. Affection becomes performance. He knows she is naive. He proceeds anyway. This is not reactive pain. This is deliberate harm. Heathcliff currently is rarely explosive. It is sustained, cold, measured. He isolated. He withholds affection. He degrades confidence. He ensures dependency. His treatment of Hayton is especially revealing. Hayton is denied education intentionally. Why? Because literacy empowers, ignorance ensures control. Heathcliff does not merely want revenge against Hindley. He wants generational humiliation. He wants inherited inferiority, that is premeditated psychological imprisonment. How the defense speaks. Heathcliff was never given stability. He was realized as other, classed as inferior. When she chose Edgar Linton, Heathcliff's last emotional anchor dissolved. Abandonment trauma compounded earlier rejection. From a psychological standpoint, his behavior aligns with attachment insecurity, chronic resentment, identity instability, obsessive fiction. He did not simply lose love, he lost validation. The validation was survival. The defense argues Heathcliff did not create cruelly created him. Here lies the crucial moment when Heathcliff acquires wealth. He acquires option. He could live. He could build elsewhere. He could detach. Instead, he returns to source of pain. That is not instinct. That is intention. He reverses trauma not to heal, but to reverse power dynamics. This is the moment victimhood transforms into agency, and agency carries responsibility. Heathcliff's fictions on Catherine is often romanticized, but look closely. It is possessive. He does not want her happiness. He wants performance. He wants her memory frozen. He cannot tolerate the idea that she lived beyond him. His obsession extends beyond life itself. He desires reunion, not the growth, but the desolation. He longs to march in death because he could not coexist in life. This is not a romance. This is annihilation of boundaries. True cruelty reveals itself in how one treats the innocent. Hayton, they did not wound him, yet they He endured the consequence of his vendetta. He engineers marriages. He manipulates inheritance. He withholds education. He prolongs suffering even when original enemies are gone. At this point, revenge has no target. It has become habit. Pain is no longer response, it is identity. The moment of deterioration. As the film approaches its conclusion, something shifts. Heathcliff begins to disengage. Food loss appeals, conversation fades. His ovation internship is internally but weakness externally. He seems less interested in control. He seems less interested in control. A more interest in dissolution. It is as if Revenge family exhausted him, not because he achieved peace, but because he ran out of opposition without enemies. Who is he? He has structured his life around and when. So we return to the central question. Was Heathcliff born cruel? No. Was he shaped by systemic cruelty? Yes. Did he have moments where he could have chosen differently? Also yes. This is the uncomfortable truth. He was manufactured by neglect, but he refined himself through vengeance. He inherited pain, but he disturbed it willingly. He understood suffering. He, instead of interpreting it, he perfected it. Heathcliff stood in court today. The ruling would be complex, mitigating circumstance acknowledged, emotional damage verified, intentional harm undeniable. He is not purely evil, he is not purely tragic. He is a study in what happens when trauma is left untreated and then impaired. He is a study in what happens when a trauma is left untreated and then empowered. He is what emerges when wounded pride gains wealth. He is proof that pain, when cultivated instead of healed, becomes a legacy. And perhaps that is why he remains one of literature's most disturbing figures. Not because is inhuman, but because he is understandable, and that understanding makes him dangerous. So, people, what do you think about this movie? This is a love and a romance movie, and this is a release on, and its movie released on 14 February 2026 for the Valentine's Day. It's just not a movie, it's a love and romance in this movie. Now I will review this movie. In this overall review this movie, Wuthering Heights 2026 is a haunting, emotionally rich and visually stunning adaptation of the classic novel. It succeeds by staying true to the psychological core of Bond's work and delivering strong performance across the main cast, using architecture, landscape, and production design to enforce character and theme. So, fans literary adaptation, psychological drama, and gothic romance, this film is a must-watch. This film rating 4.5 out of 5. I can also in this movie, themes and analyzes love and ovation. The film explores love as an uncomfortable, consuming force. So, this movie is a blockbuster movie, and now this movie is trending on USA and other countries. So, this is the must-watch movie in 2026. So, if you love this breakdown and storytelling and story breakdown review, so please subscribe this channel and like this video. In this movie, the cinematography uses wide shots of the moors to emphasize isolation and emotional vastness. Fog, wind, and storm sequences are not just visual elements, they echo the turbulence in the character hearts. So today I will go and bye. Thank you everyone.